And meantime, the U.S. Supreme Court agrees to hear a new case this fall concerning religious freedom. The case involves Lori Smith, a web designer and owner of 303 Creative. She is a Christian with traditional views on marriage. Colorado law forces Smith and her studio to design and publish websites that promote messages which she says violate her religious beliefs. And joining me now to discuss this is Andrea Pachani-Bear, director of the Conscious Project. Andrea, welcome back. Great to see you. Great to see you in person.
Oh, I always love the invitation to come on, Tracy. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. We love to have you. Andrea, for those who aren't familiar with this case, tell us a little bit more about it.
You know, Tracy, this is a really interesting case involving government censorship and compelled speech. The state of Colorado has a Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act that basically covers public accommodations, and it's covered very broadly to include things like sexual orientation. Lori Smith, as you mentioned earlier, is a young entrepreneur, owner of 303 Creative, a web design company, and she wanted to provide wedding websites, which I didn't know actually existed, but apparently that's a thing. And she said, you know, I want to do this, but I don't want to provide wedding websites for same-sex weddings because it goes against my beliefs of traditional marriage. And I want to make sure I don't get into trouble with my government. So she went to federal court and asked for guidance on the issue, and the court said, no, you know what? Under this state law, you have to provide the services to same-sex couples, and you can't put on a disclaimer on your website, kind of letting people know in advance that this isn't really what you want to do and how you want to use your expressive talent. Sadly, the Court of Appeals, the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals this past summer, ruled that that was the case, that she was going to be bound to provide services against her beliefs. But yesterday, the Supreme Court granted review of the case. It's on the narrow issue of the free speech protections for Lori Smith, but I think it's a very important case that's going to really help identify the intersection of these constitutional rights plus anti-discrimination laws, as we're seeing pop up more and more frequently in progressive states especially.
Yeah, and this is not the first time we've seen a similar case in Colorado. Let's talk about that involving Jack Phillips, the baker.
Absolutely. Everyone will probably remember Masterpiece Cake Shop, and this was owned by a Christian cake baker, Jack Phillips, who incidentally made Lori Smith's wedding cake. So they know each other, and several years ago, Mr. Phillips ran into the same problems. He actually was held in violation of the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act. And he said, but look, making wedding cakes for same-sex marriage, for same-sex weddings was against his Christian belief. And the Colorado Civil Rights Commission said it doesn't matter. You have to do that. The Supreme Court reviewed his case and said there was such hostility that this commission showed towards Phillips' beliefs that they really saw that this wasn't fair treatment. It was really targeting religious belief, and they sent it back. But they didn't look at the constitutionality of CADA, this Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act, in the first place.
Do you think, Andrea, and this may sound like a silly question to you, but will that case have any implication on this current case?
Well, I think it really did motivate the justices, right? There are lingering issues that weren't resolved in their resolution of Jack Phillips' case. And as people who have been watching the poor situation facing Mr. Phillips, he continues to be targeted. He was targeted by people who wanted him to make a gender reveal cake for a person who is manifesting as gender other than their biological sex. And so I think that the Supreme Court realizes they need to close the loop on this. They need to reach these important constitutional issues, especially reaffirming that the government cannot compel speech and the government cannot censor speech, particularly where there can be exemptions or accommodations for sincerely held religious beliefs, like in the case of Ms. Smith.
Yeah, and let's talk about her case a little more. I know it's kind of far off. I mean, they're not going to hear it until the fall. But do you have a sense of where things may go with this?
You know, I think because it's focused on the issue of free speech, the justices really are we're going to see not so much a 5-4 split. There are going to be civil libertarians that typically are on the left of the bench that are going to side with this issue of you cannot force an entrepreneur to use their creative talents against their beliefs. And if you allow for a secular artist to decline to serve someone, you should allow somebody who's declining to engage in this for religious beliefs even more, because those beliefs are protected under the Constitution.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you, I mean, what's at stake here when it comes to religious freedom?
You know, I really think that there's this dichotomy that's being set up, and I think it's a false one. It's this notion of, as anti-discrimination laws are being expanded, you can't allow for religious freedom. I don't think it's an either-or, and I think this case is really going to set a marker on the notion of there's a way that we can all get along. And this isn't denying people access to wedding website designers. It's just saying not with this operation. And it really is a way, I think, to celebrate our greatest traditions, which is freedom for people to believe the way that they believe with, you know, even if you disagree with them.
Absolutely. And you're going to continue to follow that case. But are there other cases that you're following right now?
You know, there is. We mentioned this the last time we were speaking. It was the case of Coach Joseph Kennedy. It was the praying football coach out in Washington State. The court is going to have an oral argument in April. It's a very interesting case involving not just free speech and expression, but private prayer and the Establishment Clause. So the kind of trifecta of our First Amendment freedoms. And I think this particular Supreme Court has shown time and time again that when it comes to individual liberties, it's going to safeguard those rights.
Okay, Andrea, thank you so much for your time and coming on and speaking with us about all this so important. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Tracy.